welcome. This is a strange meeting. My name is Karim, and I'm hosting today, like I often do. I'm also talking today, which I don't often do. So I'm kind of hosting myself, which is a little odd, but very cool. Very cool indeed. So thank you for coming. This is the Agile Leadership and Business Agility Meetup. And these are two topics, two areas about which I'm incredibly passionate. And I started this group probably close to 18 months ago now, and I run it with some of my colleagues. And we've had some absolutely wonderful speakers. And it's, the reason behind it was that there's a lot of Agile focused groups out there, a lot of Scrum focused groups, but I wanted something that was going to focus on organizational agility, business agility from a leadership perspective. And so that's kind of the why of this group. So it's really quite cool to be speaking here today. And but what I'm going to do before we do anything is I want to know where you all are in the world. So if you could do me a favor and just write in the chat exactly where you are in the world, just to give us a flavor of the locations of everybody. That would be really great. So I will start. Someone beat me to it. We've got Brighton, and we've got the Bay Area, sunny California there, very nice. Cambridge, a few people in Cambridge, wonderful. Cambridge, Berkshire, Minnesota, nice to see some people from the States. Austin, great city, Austin. Was the last Scrum conference I went to was Austin. Unfortunately, it was some time ago. DC, Cambridge, Berlin, look at this, all around the world. Ghana, fabulous. Don't get too many people from Africa. Wonderful. London again. Munich, brilliant. Well, it's great to have you all here. Thank you so much for coming along. And that's the joy, I guess, of this virtual world, is that we can all join in from wherever we are. So thank you for coming. For those of you who've just joined, my name is Karim. I'm both hosting and talking today, which is unusual, but it happens sometimes. So without further ado, I'm going to dive into my presentation. So I'm just going to share some slides with you. I'm going to talk through some concepts with you, and then we'll leave some time for some chats and some questions at the end. Okay, so bear with me, because for the first little bit, I'm going to be both talking and trying to let people in from the waiting room, but I'm sure we'll be fine. So we are recording. Fabulous. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to dive straight in. So here we go. So, and if you bear with me, I just want to make sure everything's in the right place. There we go, better. Now, as I've said, my name is Karim, and this talk is called The 6 Enablers of Business Agility. I'm going to be talking through what those are, and covering some high-level points about how we can get all this stuff to hang together as well. So let's have a look at these key topics. Firstly, we're going to talk about business agility itself. Like, what is it? What is the case for business agility? Why are we talking about this thing? Next, we're going to talk about the 6 enablers of business agility and how we can create the environment for success. And finally, we're going to talk a little bit about, just a touch, this is just to bring it together, how we can set our transformations up for success, and how we can pull it together and get a view of everything that we're doing. So we're going to try and do that in sort of 40 to 45 minutes to leave plenty of time at the end for questions. So my first question to you is this. Talk about business agility. What is business agility? What does business agility mean to you? If you can write that in the chat, that would be absolutely wonderful. So get your definitions of business agility in the chat for me, and we'll see what you come up with. So who's going to be brave and go first? Set of organizational capabilities and behaviors, forge your business freedom, flexibility, resilience, good stuff, great words here. The practices at the organizational level, responsive to change, being able to respond to change. We got the responsiveness, the change aspect in there. Again, we've got changes, adapting. Excellent. Survival. Well, increasingly important for survival. Absolutely, Rachel. Thanks for that. Thank you. So yes, indeed, we're going to be covering some of these things. But thank you for sharing that, because I think it's important for us to be on the same page as to what we mean by this thing before we talk about how we get this thing. But before we do, I'm going to start with a bit of about the natural world. I'm actually going to talk a little bit, not necessarily woolly mammoths, but not far away. Okay, and this will be relevant, I promise. So back in time, if we go back in time, we're talking hundreds of thousands, millions of years ago. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that mammals, but also reptiles, evolved to get bigger and bigger and bigger over time. I mean, there is a competitive advantage to being big. And because of that competitive advantage, next generation gets a bit bigger, and then natural selection means that the next generation gets a bit bigger. And over time, you end up with these enormous creatures. Now, I'm told that there used to be a 2-ton wombat that lumbered around the outback in Australia. There's really these enormous creatures, the woolly mammoths, of course, and various others. If we go back far enough, of course, we had a Apatosaurus, Diplodocus. Anyone who's been to the Natural History Museum, while Dippy was there, that's the one in London. While Dippy, the Diplodocus skeleton, was there, you'll see the scale of these things is quite spectacular. And there was a reason for that, because the competitive advantage is that you obviously more able to fight off your own kind. So if you're bigger and stronger, you have a competitive advantage when fighting for resources and the ability to mate and pass on your genes. You can fight off predators more quickly, more easily, if you're bigger and stronger. You can, obviously you can catch predators if you are one. You can travel further to get resources. You can store more energy, which means you can survive the lean times better. There's just a number of reasons that being bigger is a competitive advantage. So over time, when the climate and the environment is stable, we see over and over again these animals getting bigger and bigger over time. But the question you're probably thinking then is like, well, that's great, but why don't we have Diplodocus anymore? Why don't we have a 2-ton wombat? Where are these creatures if there's such a big competitive advantage to being big? And as you can probably know, because most people know what happened to the poor old dinosaurs, nature has a nice inbuilt counterbalance. And the counterbalance is extinction events. Now, there've been 5 major extinction events, but the most famous is the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction event, and that involved an asteroid slamming into what is now the Gulf of Mexico and setting off a chain of events that led to the wiping out of 75% of life on Earth. That's plants and animals. 75% gone. Right? We don't see a trace of the dinosaurs after that event. But what's interesting is when the environment changes dramatically, it is the small creatures that survive. Now, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that animals that were 25 kilograms or below, that's about 55 pounds for you across the Atlantic, and below, they were the ones that survived. Small cat-sized creatures and below was more realistic. And so when the environment is stable, we see a competitive advantage for these big lumbering animals. When the environment changes dramatically, it's the smaller, more nimble creatures that are more able to adapt, to find shelter, to forage, to reproduce more quickly, to adapt to the new environment. And these big animals are unable to do so, and they die out. And I think there's an incredibly interesting parallel to the business world, where we see a similar dynamic playing out. And we're going to touch on that. But business agility really is the ability to do what those small creatures were able to do 66 million years ago, except we need to do it right now. So that's me. Yes, I'm a CST, CEC. Basically, I've been in the Agile space a long time. I've been working with leaders and big enterprise transformations for many years now. It's my passion, it's my focus, innovation, strategy, business agility, all that good stuff. I can nerd out on that stuff for a long time. All right, so that's me. We really don't need to spend any more time on that. I want to get into the meat now. So what I want to do is, there's a thread that runs through a lot of my work, and it involves 2 competing organizational dynamics, 2 activities that organizations are undertaking all of the time. Now, some will do more on one side, some will do more on the other side, some will do an equal amount of both. Right? But I think we need to understand this before we can talk about what business agility is. So the first side is what we call exploiting. Exploiting is when you have a proven business, a proven product and service, and all you need to do is execute against that. I say all you need to do, doesn't mean it's easy. You need to execute against that, right? So it's a proven products and service, the processes are understood, you can make reasonably good plans, it's predictable, and it's about reducing cost, being more efficient, and small incremental improvements to the product. An example of this, if you're a pharmaceutical company, is let's say you have a drug on the market, right? It's got all its licenses, it's out there. All you need to do is to manufacture it as cheaply as possible, right? As cheaply and quickly as possible. You need efficiency in your manufacturing. You need to package it, bottle it. You need to ship it, distribute it around the world. You need to market it. You need to get people to buy it, right? But you know how to do these things because, well, this is stuff that you probably did last year for the same product and the year before. So you've got data, you understand this, you may be going for incremental improvements. Exploiting your current products and services and business models is incredibly important. It's how we keep the lights on. On the other side, we have exploring, because most organizations know, at least conceptually, that every product, every service, every business model has a shelf life. And when that comes to the end of its shelf life, your revenues dry up. So whilst executing against that, you also need to explore new products, new services, new business models, because these are going to be the things that keep the lights on in the future. Now, this is entirely different because you don't have data. You weren't doing exactly what you're doing now on this exact same product last year. This is incredibly creative. It's highly unpredictable. It's very difficult to plan. It's experimental. You need to try stuff. You need to fail a lot. And the focus is on doing new things, on learning. So as you can see, these are very different dynamics. One is business as usual. One is innovation, if you want to call it that. Execution, right, versus innovation. Explore versus exploit. So this is going to be a thread through the talk, because we need to understand these things are different activities and equally important. So let me start off by talking about the late 19th and early 20th century, when big organizations sprung up. And this is the Model T, as introduced by Henry Ford, one of the most successful cars ever. In fact, the car of the century, the car of that century. Now, when they introduced the Model T in 1909, it took the people assembling that 12 hours to bring together the 3,000 parts to make a Model T. You had it in the middle of the factory. People would run out and go and get bits and bobs and do various things and put the car together, right? Get some jiggery pokery. And that retailed at $850. What Ford did, and the genius of Ford, was he realized that we needed to make this more efficiently, more cheaply, in order to reduce prices, so that, you know, sort of the average man and woman in the street could afford this thing. And so they had to dramatically bring that down. And what he did was he introduced an operational innovation, as you probably know, the moving assembly line. Now, the moving assembly line meant that people could stay still and the car could move along. And each person would just do the same thing to each car as it passed them. Screw on the wheels, and the next car comes through, screw on the wheels, and someone else would put on the steering wheel. And it was about efficiency, and everybody would focus on their specialization. It's incredibly efficient. Actually, the 12 hours to assemble a car went down to 90 minutes. The $850 retail price went down to $300. Can you imagine that? That's like a Tesla Model X going from £85,000 to £30,000. Could you imagine the demand if that happened today? And this is how organizations survived and thrived in the 20th century, particularly the first half of the 20th century. Through efficiency and economies of scale and focus on cost and efficient execution and production, right? And these organizations grew massively successful off the back of this, right? And, you know, as organizations were coming into being, because this is when these big organizations first started to get big, we were working out how to structure organizations, and hierarchies and cultures and structures and bureaucracy grew up off the back of this mindset where we worshipped at the altar of efficiency, and man was it successful. That was then. And towards the middle and end of the 20th century, the stable business climate we saw throughout the first part of the 20th century gave way to something else. And something called VUCA. You know, there are many models for this. I use the term VUCA because it's easy to explain. This is a term that was used primarily, initially at least, by the US Military College back in the 1990s to describe the post-Cold War era, where nothing really made sense. The rules of the game had all changed, and all of the things that they thought they knew, they didn't know anymore. And VUCA stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Volatility is the incredible pace of change now. The speed, the type, the volume. McKinsey Global Institute report estimates that the pace of change now is 10 times what it was during the Industrial Revolution, on a scale of 300 times what it was back then. That's a total impact of 3,000 times greater than the Industrial Revolution happening right now. That is, we've never seen such a period of instability, of rapid breakneck change. And we probably will only see that increase. Okay, so this is a changing business climate that we're in. Uncertainty is about our inability to make predictions. And partly that's because of the increased volatility. If the world changes quickly, it's very difficult to know how it's going to change. And if you do know how it's going to change, you're probably making a lot of money, right? But most people don't know how it's going to change. It becomes very difficult to predict the future. Right, so we don't know, we can't make that 5-year strategic plan and just execute against it, because who knows what the world looks like in 5 years? Who would have thought that we'd be where we are right now 18 months or 2 years ago? Complexity is about the interconnectedness of things. There are many more moving parts now, all interacting with many other moving parts, which interact with many other moving parts. From our network of suppliers to our network of dealers and distributors, to technology, to the different markets in which we operate and the different customer segments we have and the different value propositions. So many, not to mention our competitors. Like, everything is interconnected now, all linked together, of course, by social media and the internet and various other things, which means the world changes in a non-linear, very quick way. And ambiguity is about our inability to connect the dots. We have so many dots, but we don't know which dots are relevant, and we don't know which dot connects to which. So whilst we have more data than we've ever had, you can draw many conclusions, perfectly valid seeming conclusions about that. And it's very difficult to know which ones are right and which ones aren't. So you don't even know what's happening right now. Never mind what's going to happen in a year's time or 3 years' time. So how do you manage an organization in those circumstances? Well, you don't do what Henry Ford did, which was just get really good at doing the thing you've always done, which saw them churn out Model Ts for 19 years. As a little, I do love a chart. I'm going to show you 3 graphs in this talk. Sorry, the 2 are coming up right now, right? And this is one of them. But look at this. This is the pace of adoption to reach 25% of the US population for these various technologies. You can see how it used to take decades for a big technology to catch on. It's been slowly going down over time. 13 years for mobile phones to reach 25% of the US population, 7, and then 4 for smartphones. I don't have the census data yet, but I'm told that smart speakers have been adopted even more quickly. Okay, so this is a trend that we're seeing, and again, this is the second of 3 charts for those chart phobics. But this is just the number of years it takes to grow a unicorn, and by a unicorn I mean a private company that is worth $1 billion market cap. But as you can see here, it used to take on average 20 years. It took those those laggards, Google, 8 years to become come on, guys, what's holding you up? Now we're measuring it in months. Okay, the world moves incredibly quickly. So what this would say to me, if I were a leader of an organization, my organization is small, but if I was a leader of a big organization and I had dominant market share, I might be looking over my shoulder thinking, how do I know there's not a technology out there that's going to disrupt my business model, being leveraged by a company that we've never heard of, right? A technology we've never heard of being leveraged by a company we've never heard of, maybe in someone's garage. And that company could completely and utterly disrupt my organization be it Netflix disrupting Blockbuster or WhatsApp disrupting the text. Who hands up the last time you paid for a text message, right? But we used to pay for text messages, and they used to make a lot of money for text messages, and then suddenly, boom, very quickly it falls off a cliff. So however well you're doing today, that does not mean you're going to do that well tomorrow. And it's not going to take decades to come. It's going to take months, years to come. So you've got to be looking out over your shoulder all the time. That's what this says to me. So that all means that VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, this is our 21st century extinction event. We've gone from a stable business climate where being big and economies of scale and all of these incumbents had a massive competitive advantage, and barriers to entry were high because of a lack of technology and regulations, to suddenly, boom, a very unstable, volatile business climate where it's not just about being big. It is about being able to adapt, to respond, to innovate more quickly than your competitors can. And so that this concept of VUCA has slowly but surely changed the game, and therefore what you need to survive and thrive as an organization also has to change. And here's the final chart. There you go. Get them all out of the way in the first 15 minutes. Here you go. This is the average tenure on the S&P 500 index. When you entered that index, you used to, the expectation would be you could be there for 61 years on average, right? So long enough to retire for most people, right? Almost everybody, right? Now it's dropped down to 15 years. This is as of 2012. That there are, and it goes further and further down. So organizations are springing up more quickly. I mean, Tesla entered in the top 10. I mean, that's almost unheard of, right? Organizations are springing up more quickly, and they're disappearing more quickly because of the nature of the world we live in. And in a sense, this is just the problem that the original Agile Manifesto, or Manifesto for Agile Software Development, was trying to solve. Right? We were trying to solve for one team building software products the level of the pace of change and the complexity and the inability to know what to do. So you got to get fast feedback and inspect and adapt. And then, of course, Agile 2.0 was how do we do that with multiple teams, all of the scaling frameworks, less and safe, and all of these things. But we're missing that final piece of the puzzle, which is how do we do that as a whole organization? How do we go and become, spin up whole products, services, and whole business models? And this is business agility. This is the next iteration, taking it beyond product development and spinning up whole organizations. This is what we call a strategic agility. All right, business agility is what I call it, right? And that's where, this is the problem that I'm trying to solve with the 6 enablers. And just to bring that back to the explore, exploit that we started with now, we know how to do this stuff on the left. This is a reasonably solved problem. If you've done an MBA, if you know traditional leadership techniques around finance, around operations, we focus on that a lot. But it turns out that what works on the left doesn't work on the right. If you want to create a more adaptive, more responsive, more innovative organization, you need new cultures. Different cultures, different structures, policies, tools, leadership styles, the whole shebang, and it needs to be different. All right? There is not a one size fits all, and this is the problem we see. We try to take what works on the left, apply it to what works on the right. It doesn't fail, so then we have to grow through acquisition, and we pay a premium buying up our competitors because they know how to innovate and we don't. Well, we're going to address that, and we're going to look at how to explore with agility rather than exploit with efficiency, or to be more accurate, to exploit with efficiency at the same time as exploring with agility. So let's run through that. Now, before we do anything, just to make sure you're still awake, I'm going to ask you this question. In your organization, what are the biggest impediments to business agility? What stops you being more responsive, more adaptive, more innovative? Chuck some stuff in the chat. Stephanie, thank you. Culture, mindset, Andrew, thank you. Love it. Keep them coming. The owner. Well, yes, that happens. Or the owners, I guess, if you have shareholders. Upper management, legacy tech, missing guardrails, like it. Politics, culture comes back again. Resistance to change. Yeah, need to get business cases there. We'll talk about that. All right, so it's that kind of that need for certainty. So I'm looking on a different machine, if you're wondering why I'm looking this way. Old thoughts, creatures of habit, resistance to change, all the old favorites. So what can we do about that? Well, firstly, we can educate around how we do this, like what needs to be true. So I'm going to walk through now, but this tends to be quite it's a common dynamic. They're saying, teams, come on, you need to be more agile. This is the leaders saying this. Go on, be more. Come on, you went on the Scrum class. Why aren't you agile yet? Oh, whatever it is you did, come on with the agility. And in the teams, they're saying, yeah, we'd love to, right? But you're in the way, and the organization's in the way. And if you moved all of this stuff out of our way, right? If you, instead of looking at the Ferrari sat in a traffic jam, if you focused on the stuff in front of it, moved it out of the way, we'd be flying down the road, or at least driving very fast down the road, right? And so we need to reconcile those two things. I love this quote. It's easier to grow a unicorn than to transform a dinosaur. It feels that way sometimes when you're trying to change these big organizations. Unicorns are grown, many of them each year, but yet agile transformations, successful ones, are pretty hard to come by. So I always enjoyed that quote from Mike there. But he's right in a lot of ways, because again, this comes from McKinsey, right? But we're spending 10 billion a year on change management consultancy, and about 70% of that fails to achieve the benefits. Now, not all of that's in the agile space, of course. We'd all be making significantly more money than we are. But I'd say that a lot of money is being spent in the agile space, and the success rates are nowhere near good enough. In fact, I think they're worse than that 70% there. So what's going on? Here's the analogy I use, right? Android apps. Nothing wrong with Android apps if that's your thing. I'm sure there are some very good ones out there, right? And they're very well made, right? But if you try to install them on an iPhone, yeah, that's not going to work. Of course, it's not going to work, right? The iPhone is a great piece of kit. These apps, I'm sure, are very well designed and very well written, right? But put them together, and there's an issue of compatibility. So they're not designed to work together. Right? You try and put trendy new processes, practices, frameworks, tools, technology in a big traditional organization with its cultures and its structures and its hierarchies and its rules. And yeah, that's not going to work either. Nothing wrong with these new practices, nothing wrong with the organization, although there might be, right? It's an issue of compatibility. So when I'm brought in to work with organizations and they say, please teach us this new framework, this new process, practice, tool, whatever it is, all right? I know, if we just write better user stories, like that's all, and then everything's going to be fine. Oh, and we need to configure Jira a bit better. Then we'll be super agile, right? Now I'm exaggerating slightly, but teach our team Scrum, and then everything will be fine. And the focus is always on the process, which is slightly ironic given the first line of the manifesto, or the first value of the manifesto, of course, individuals and interactions over processes and tools. And here we are, frameworks, process, tools, right? But my response is always, yes, that's great, and I can teach you these things, and I've done that for many years, right? But actually, you probably want to forget about that right now, because there's some other stuff we need to think about, right? Just like the Android app won't work on the operating system that is designed for the iOS operating system, you need to create a new organizational operating system, one that is compatible with these new ways of working. Otherwise, the organizational antibody will always win. It won't work. And for me, this is the organizational operating system. And I call this model the 6 enablers of business agility. That's what I'm going to run through now for the next 15 minutes or so, as to why these things and what these things are and how these things contribute to creating the environment for all of this stuff that we know and love to work. Be it Scrum, be it safe, less, design thinking, lean startup, name your tool and approach here, right? But none of those things are going to work unless we create this. So let's run through them one by one. We start with leadership and management, and I start with leadership and management because it's the most important thing by some distance. And without the mindset of leaders and managers in the organization fundamentally changing, nothing else is going to change. I can almost guarantee that, because of course the leaders and the managers create the environment, and if they don't change the way they see the world, they won't change the environment. So this is an incredibly important place to start. Leaders always must go first. And we're looking at moving away from these things, right? When Frederick Winslow Taylor released the Principles of Scientific Management in 1911, by the way, that's some years ago now, over 100 years ago, 110 years ago, all right? What he was trying to do was help people to be more efficient in factories. These people didn't have to use their brains. We weren't trying to get the best out of their creative thinking and problem solving. It was just turn up, follow the rules, go home. It was command and control, micromanagement, right? And you listen to me because of my expertise and my positional authority. I do the thinking and the planning, you do the doing, right? And you know, to a certain extent, that mentality is still there. I'm the manager, I make the decision, I know best, despite the fact that you have all the information, right? And I'm going to focus on how you do the work. I'm going to tell you exactly what to do. We need to move away from that, right? Once you get even a moderate level of complexity and volatility in the work, like there is no way one person can have the cognitive capacity to grasp everything that's going on, or the physical presence to be everywhere to make those decisions. It's just impossible, not to mention the impact it has on engagement. We'll talk about that, right? So we need to move away from that. Your job as a leader is still incredibly important. And in fact, it's more important because now you're creating the environment. You are articulating an inspiring vision. You are communicating what we're trying to achieve and why it's important. And you are decentralizing the decision-making. You're empowering others to make that a reality, because that way they will make faster decisions and they'll make better decisions. And then it's your job to invest in the growth of those around you to ensure that they're doing the best job they can in service of realizing those visions and hitting that objective. It's an entirely different style of leadership, and really there needs to be a journey for the leaders go on in any organization away from that more command and control, hands-on, to that enabling, supporting, dare I say, servant leadership that we talk so much about in the Agile world. This is not anti-managers and leaders, right? This is the interesting stuff. This is focusing on creating the environment, right? Leaders as gardeners. You're not making the flower grow. What you're doing is creating the environment so that they will, right? It's incredibly, it's much more interesting. And so that's why we start with leadership and management. But you know, if that doesn't change, nothing else is going to change. Moving on now, and I think culture popped up a lot, right? In as your the barriers to greater agility, it pops up a lot on almost every version 1 state of the state of Agile report. For those of you who read that, as one of the biggest blockers, organizational culture at odds with Agile values, right? Well, yes, because it is in most organizations. Think about when most organizations were growing, when most organizational design was happening. It was that second industrial revolution. It was that production line mentality we talked about with the Model T. Right? It was efficiency, it was compliance, and it's basically these things. It was about control, conformity, fear, secrecy, blame, at a Theory X perspective on the world, is that people are inherently lazy and we need to control them, right? Well, nothing's going to thrive in that culture, right? Until you move away from that and start focusing on creating a culture of trust and transparency, openness, collaboration, all these things that we see here, right? This isn't just because it's nicer. It is nicer, right? But actually, when you have this culture, you get the behaviors that you want to see, and you get that those people who are going to go the extra mile, right? And so without creating a culture is, for me, how people behave when there's no rules to tell them how to behave, right? And so we need to fall back on these things. And people ask me, how do you change the culture, right? There are plenty of tools for assessing culture, but how do you change it? You change culture not by changing culture, because you can't change this nebulous concept. What you can do is change people's behaviors. Actually, you can't even change their behaviors directly. You can change structures, policies, incentives, metrics, and your leadership behaviors. Those things will lead to behavioral change, which will lead to culture change. Right? It's a very indirect way of changing the culture. The culture emerges as a result of the behaviors, and the behaviors emerge as a result of the environment you set as leaders. It's a very roundabout way of doing it, but it's very much doable. You will always have a culture. The question is, do you want to sleepwalk into one, or do you want to consciously design one that is right for you? And I think the latter tends to be the answer. Okay, so getting that culture right is incredibly important. It's a great starting point, and it's a great thing to track. We move on to structure. Now, it's funny, like if you are on an oil tanker and you are in a race, it's kind of a slalom-like race, you've got to weave in and out against somebody who is in a speedboat, right? There's very little you're going to do short of like running them over that's going to allow you to win that race. And so structure for me is incredibly impactful because it's in your direct control as leaders, and it makes a massive difference on the organization, right? How you design the organization. And we need to move away from top-down hierarchies, functional silos, and everyone in their box, and a million coordinators running around, right, making sure these virtual teams are collaborating as much as possible, focusing on individual productivity. We want to move away from that. And we want to move towards, we know cross-functional self-managing teams are important, but the network of those cross-functional self-managing teams to reduce those silos, to reduce those handoffs. Jeff Bezos said it best: a hierarchy is not responsive enough to change. It's too rigid, going up and down the chain. You need to create that adaptive network, right? We know how to create self-managing teams with high trust, moving towards a common goal. We scale that up with multiple teams collaborating with each other, moving towards that goal. That's what the adaptive agile organization looks like. Okay, so it's a massive change from a structural perspective, but without it, just think about Scrum, the cross-functional teams, right? How do you do that in a standard hierarchy, right? It just doesn't work. And we'll talk about incentives in the next topic. So people and engagement. An organization is nothing without its people, right? Its people are the most important thing. And yet often HR is ignored in a transformation. Right? We bring everyone on board, we bring IT, and we ignore HR and we ignore finance. Why do we do that? Right? Because actually, if we want to move away from this bureaucracy, this compliance, these rules, these processes from a people engagement, this has led to wide-scale disengagement. The last report, or the most rigorous report I've seen from Gallup, 15% of people engaged at work. 15, that's globally, right? It's even worse in Europe. It's like 10% in Europe on average, and UK is 11, barely better. Engaged. Then we've got only 10 to 15% of people who are passionate about their work or workplace, like who are going the extra mile, who are giving their discretionary effort. That's a damning indictment of how we set up our organizations. And when you look at how organizations run, they are not designed to play to people's initiative, their creativity, their passion. They're there for compliance, and that's why people are so disengaged. In fact, we want to move away from that, and we want to move towards trust and freedom and recognition. Recognition is like almost the number one thing people want in their organizations. They want to be recognized for the work and the contribution, right? But we just don't do that. We want to be able to trust, we want to be able to build relationships. We want to contribute towards a purpose. And this is what motivates. We're all familiar with Dan Pink's work, Autonomy, Mastery, Purpose. There's so much more that makes people come to work and give their discretionary effort to drive the organization forward, right? And if we're not focusing on, again, it's very similar to the culture, right? Creating this environment of trust, transparency, and psychological safety, and managing for high engagement, and reworking our HR policies. For example, so many times you have people have to make a choice between what's right for me as an individual and what's right for the team. Now, most people are going to choose what's right for them, their pay and promotion. Why are those things not aligned? Why do we still have individual incentives rather than team-based incentives, right? This is a small thing, but it just shows us how still in the industrial revolution mindset we are from an HR perspective. So this absolutely needs to be addressed in your transformation. Governance and funding. This one raises eyebrows. I get a lot of people look at me like, governance and funding? It's like, well, yes, governance and funding, right? It's one of the most common questions I get on a CSM. People say, hey, that's great. Yeah, we go to the sprint review. We have conversation with our stakeholders. They give feedback, right? And then the inevitable question comes. So how can we be agile if we're not allowed to change the scope? If the scope's been signed off in the business case and we can't change it without change control. And it always makes me smile. It's like, well, what you're saying is, how can you be agile, i.e. respond to change, whilst sticking to your fixed scope, i.e. not responding to change? There's a conflict there, right? But if you've got annual budgets, if you've got upfront business cases, strict change control so that you can't deviate from that. You've got RAG statuses, these rigid plans that you have to hit. I've been there. I've been a project manager, right? This is how the world seems to work, right? And you've got these fixed scopes that you need to deliver. What scope is there for agility? What scope is there from learning as we go and adapting based on the feedback and based on the world changing around us? Almost none is the answer. All right. And so actually what we need to do is move towards, this. A safe to fail experiment. Why can't we try 20 different ideas cheaply and quickly? Roll out 15 of them. All right, dive in a bit more to the 5 that showed promise. All right, spend a bit more. Roll out 3 of those. We've got 2 left. Dive into these. Roll out 1 of those. Put our money behind that one based on data. Right. That doesn't involve upfront business cases and then sticking to it. It involves trying things. It involves testing with our customers, design thinking, lean startup. Right, but if we've got a governance policy that doesn't allow that, right, it's not going anywhere, right? So we need adaptive plans, feedback learning. We need to embrace the uncertainty. I know that that's kind of a dirty word for a lot of people, right? What am I going to get? When am I going to get it? Right, how much is it going to cost? Right? We want to know this, and wouldn't it be great if we could? Right? It's not how innovation works, and no organization is able to know this stuff up front. Focus on business outcomes, right, and focus less on the exact features that get us to it, right? And we'll have much more success. Now, this is one of and the Business Agility Institute did a study. This is one of the #1 factors that indicates success in a transformation. Do you attack the governance piece, right? Is PMO in there? Is finance in there alongside HR, right? I'm trying to do this in a silo. Then, if there's one thing you don't want to mess with in big organizations, it's the governance process. And when I say mess with it, I mean, you don't want to go against it. So you have to work with them to reinvent something that is aligned with the explore type of work without throwing away the exploit side. So that's the organizational operating system. And then finally, in ways of working, what we've got these rigid processes, this documentation, this standardization. You all have to use Scrum, you all have to use Kanban, you all have to use Jira, or worse, all of these things, instead of allowing the teams to use what works for them, to collaborate, to get fast feedback, to be flexible in their approach, and to relentlessly use Kaizen and continuous improvement. Right? And this is where the frameworks that we know and love, Scrum, Kanban, Less, Safe, design thinking, this is where these fit. Processes, practices, frameworks, tools. All right, this is the stuff we do pretty well. But as you can see, if we haven't addressed the other enablers, then we really are going to struggle. So they are the 6 enablers, and it evolved largely as a result of me working on so many failed transformations and saying, hey folks, what I've noticed is if you ignore all this stuff, bad things happen, right? Whereas if you address them, I've worked on some where they've actually done these things and it's been fantastic. So I've tried to pull that together as a consulting framework and turned into this, but the more we can communicate, the breadth of the change, the better. So that is the 6 enablers. I want to show you one thing quickly, then we'll take some Q&A, and we'll run a little competition at the end and see if somebody is lucky enough to win a copy of the book, The 6 Enablers, as well. So stick around for that. We'll be giving one of those away. This is a tool that I find incredibly useful when you are starting and when you are continuing on your journey, right? And so I'm gonna show you, because I'm gonna have a closer look at this, right? But ideally, we start with what and why. Why are we doing this? What are we trying to achieve? And we move into roughly how are we going to do it. Then we look at what else, because I couldn't think of a snazzy title for that last one. So I'm calling it what else. My suggestions for a better title are welcome. All right, and this iterative process. And what I found is so many people are failing even on this first thing, like to articulate a vision for the change, right? To talk about the values. What are the success criteria for this transformation? Basic stuff in change management that isn't happening, right? And I'm a big fan of the business model canvas. You'll smell the business model canvas all over this, because, well, it works well in terms of seeing how the pieces fit together. So I've borrowed it, right? But having alignment and having transparency over what we're trying to achieve is no bad thing. And we start there, then we move into the how. Notice these are the 6 enablers of business agility. And when I've used this, what you see is people and engagement, empty. Governance and funding, empty. What that says to me is we are not addressing these enablers. And what that says to me is that we are unlikely to be successful. So it makes very clear what we're not doing and should be doing. Right? And it also makes clear how all the pieces fit together to make sure they're coherent and aligned towards our vision. It's incredibly valuable to have that conversation. Okay, so we want to start using Scrum. Great. What implications does that have on our team structure? Well, we need cross-functional self-managing teams. So our hierarchy is going to have to go, or at least it is for these teams. Okay, what about governance and funding models? Well, we can't inspect and adapt whilst not inspecting and adapt. So we'll have to have a more flexible governance policy. Okay, what about leadership styles? Well, we have self-managing teams, so we need a different, more servant leadership style. You see how these things all fit together, and you start covering all 6 of these enablers. And finally, what else? Right? But whatever we call it, key partners and stakeholders, what are the key risks? What could go wrong? What's currently in the way that we need leaders to move out of the way to make sure this is successful? Okay, so you can download this, by the way, from the website. I'll ping you a link to it afterwards. But this is, and there's a 20-page guidebook as well that I've put together. So it's free, no purchase required, but I just want people to use it. And if they get value out of it, wonderful. Right? But you can create your own version of this. It's Creative Commons, but just seeing it up there and having the conversation with leadership is incredibly impactful for alignment and for communication. So I recommend doing something like this. All right. So that was a whistle-stop tour of the 6 enablers of business agility and of how we pull it together with the business agility canvas, right? So really the only way to survive and thrive is to continue with your operational excellence around exploiting your current products and services, but also to learn how to explore new ones, how to innovate, how to respond to change. And those require very, very different types of skills and activities and cultures. In order to achieve business agility, it's not just a case of going on a Scrum class or of installing Jira or having stand-ups every morning. Right? You really do need to create the organizational operating system for success. And you do that by attacking all of those 6 enablers of business agility, not just 1 or 2. Right? It's really important we don't miss any out. And finally, make sure that your changes are aligned, coherent, coordinated, and driven by leadership. Right? No point in doing something over here that's not aligned to something over there. And of course, you're never going to be able to change these things without senior leaders driving it, because hey, who can change the structures? Who can change governance? Right? It's not the test manager, that's for sure. Right? We want everyone on board. We want bottom up and top down, but the real structural change comes from the top there, whether we like it or not. And so if they're not on board, it's going to be really challenging. Again, I'll send you the link to this. I have a free assessment tool for the 6 enablers, just 3 quick questions for each enabler. So 18 questions, and you'll get a picture. It's not as sophisticated as it looks here, by the way. It's a PDF. You draw with a pen, but I'm sure you're capable of doing that. Shading in yourself. It will be digitized one of these days, but you don't want me coding it. So, but right now you can download that from the website as well, or from 6enablers.com, which I'll send you a link to as well. So I just want these tools to be out there. That is like the first half an hour of my certified Agile leadership class. And of course, we go way deeper into 5 of the 6 enablers. We don't look at ways of working because they're covered in other classes, but we look at how to create that environment in much more detail and some of the tools and techniques that we use to do that, if you'd like to dive more deeply. It's finally in existence after, don't even ask, 2 years of pain. So basically, the course has been condensed into the book. It got released on the 1st of June, although there was an Amazon bug, which looked like it wasn't available till the 15th. However, it now is for sure available. And so you can check that out. Again, I'll send you the link to that. There we are, 20+7, so 10 minutes for questions. That's probably about a record for me in terms of not overrunning. So thank you for coming, and I appreciate you being here and giving me your attention. I will open it up for a few questions, and then towards the end we will run a little competition to see who is going to win one of these babies, and I'll send that out to you. So stay tuned for that. But questions, everybody, please don't hold back. What do you want to know?
I'm curious if you could go back to the beginning of a failed transformation. Is there something you would have done differently?
So many things. Well, yeah, I mean, so firstly, almost every transformation that I've worked on that's failed, you get this, you hear this, right? Leadership is definitely on board. Leadership buys into this change, right? Great, excellent. Well, we need leadership to buy in, then I'm in, right? What I would do is say, I would respond differently. I would say, that's great. Are they going to be actively involved? Will we see them on a weekly or 2 weekly basis? Will they be actively driving the change, removing obstacles, designing the culture and the structure of the organization? And if the answer is no, then my question will be, well, who else is empowered to make those changes? And if the answer is nobody, then how do you expect to be successful? So if I could go right back to the start, I would make sure that leaders aren't just brought in, but they are A, absolutely aware of those 6 enablers, and B, they are personally committed to driving this change. I've never seen it work any other way. So, I mean, that for me is the number one question I ask now that I didn't used to ask back then. And I'm in the fortunate position of being able to politely decline any organization where that leadership isn't there driving it, because I don't see that that's going to be successful. So yeah, that's what I'd say on that one, Stephanie. Thank you for the question though. Feel free to unmute yourself and talk, or to raise your hand, or to just write it in the chat. Any questions that you have about that? We have 8 minutes left. What's on your mind?
So as per the earlier slide where you said that the transformation from Agile 1.0, where it started with Scrum, the other one started with Scaled Agile. The Scaled Agile part was actually an Agile coach or a leadership driven, so that, you know, it can be implemented at an organization level. With regards to this business agility, who are the main stakeholders who can actually drive this? Because this has to be done at an organizational level, not at a project level.
Oh, for sure. Because at a project level, you're not going to be able to change many, if any, of those things. And so it has to be done at an organizational level. Now, what I will say is you don't have to change the whole organization in one go, right? And one of the mistakes I see made is people think there's a one-size-fits-all way approach to change. Actually, if you assess the culture of the organization, what you'll find are there are some very conservative organizations that require incremental change. There are some there's some cultures that require transformational change, right? And so big bang rather than revolution rather than evolution. And so, I mean, that aside, most of my clients are in that kind of more incremental change. And so I don't think you do this by ignoring any of those enablers. But remember, you don't have to do this across the whole organization. You could take one product, one service, one value stream, and you could get people out of the standard hierarchy, get people out of the standard governance process, get people out of the standard leadership style and culture just for that product. And it could be as small as 2 or 3 teams, right, that are exempt from the traditional ways of working, right? And get that working end to end. We call that narrow and deep, rather than broad and shallow. Too often we see, like, try and change 20 teams at once just in a shallow way. Change 2 or 3 teams working on a product all the way through, and that of course has to be driven by leadership. But then it makes it's contained, right? It's just one product, or kind of medium-sized product. It's not like 40 teams at once. And if you call it an experiment, it's amazing what you get away with in big organizations as well, as I've found. So I would start in that way. All of the enablers, but just a limited number of products at the start, and then scale it out, reproduce it as you go. So thank you for that. I see a few more questions coming in. So it's easier moderating when there's a different speaker. So bear with me. We've talked about how we can create time, attention, and support when a product solution to a customer problem is currently small, but it will become much bigger. The appropriate. You have to help me out with that, Andrew. Give me a bit more on what you mean with that.
Yeah. So it's just kind of how it's just easy in a large, excuse me, the large organization. It's easy to ignore those kind of small niches that potentially could become much bigger, but you don't, you know, without the attention of the marketing teams and the sales teams who are busy focusing on all the exploit stuff, you're never going to get those small niches
Yeah.
to develop sufficiently into something that actually could become tomorrow's revenue stream. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, people are very focused on today's profit, and that's precisely what the debate they had in the boardroom at Blockbuster. Do we want to sacrifice 200 million off our bottom line to build out an online presence? And the overwhelming response was no, we don't. And they got rid of the CEO who wanted to do that in response to Netflix, and they said this is going to destroy shareholder value. We want to focus on being more efficient now. And they were incredibly efficient now. Unfortunately, the now wasn't quite as long as they thought it was going to be, right? So every organization has this balance to strike between maximizing revenue and profits, but also investing for tomorrow. And you need, it's a board level decision, right? It's like we do have an innovation ambition. Look at Amazon. Amazon doesn't rest on its laurels, right? It has the most successful and the biggest retail operation out there, and it spins up Amazon Web Services that takes $50 billion a year, and it creates the Kindle, and it creates Alexa, and it moves into Amazon Digital, and it knows it needs to relentlessly do that. And Jeff Bezos is a very strong CEO, and he doesn't answer to his shareholders particularly, but not everyone is in that position. So absolutely, you're right. It's very difficult to give time and attention to this, because it will in the short term decrease your profits potentially and be painful for the long-term gain, right? But every organization needs to be run for the short, medium, and long term. You wouldn't know it though, would you? So yes, great point. Do you compare explore and exploit with Kent Beck's 3X thinking model? Explore, expand, extract. Very similar, yeah. It's also very similar to the McKinsey 3 Horizons as well. I mean, I just like to simplify things. We're doing stuff we know how to do, and we're doing new stuff. I tried to use things like Cynefin. I tried to use a Stacy framework to explain. It's like, actually, I'll boil it down to explore, exploit. Alex Osterwalder talks about this in books like The Invincible Company, and it's not, these aren't terminology that I've invented. It's been out there for some time. We call them ambidextrous organizations that can explore and exploit simultaneously. They're incredibly rare. Amazon is one of them. Netflix is one of them, but most are erring on the side of exploit. Oh, it's 7:28. Let me see what more. Is the primary motivation for transformation is save money rather than, yeah, you're right. Yeah, I want more for less, right? And that is a misunderstanding of what agility is. Agility is not going to save you money necessarily, unless you count building the wrong thing as waste, which it is, right? But it's not about just more efficiently delivering those things that you already were going to deliver. It's a fundamentally different operating system. So it isn't about saving money. It's about taking an experimental approach in an environment of high uncertainty and volatility, because there is no straight line to success there. There is in a more stable environment, but not here. So that's a misunderstanding of what the whole Agile movement was about, from people who are stuck in an efficiency mindset, in an industrial revolution mindset, unfortunately. So yeah, it is. We want more for less. We want to save money faster, cheaper. I see it everywhere. I'll take one more question, and then I'm going to ask you a question and see if somebody is up to the challenge of winning that book. What difference between incremental change and transformation? What the difference between incremental and transformational? The difference is just the scale of the change, right? So a transformational change, it could be, we go home on Friday, we come back, team structures have changed, governance policies have changed. We have a whole new way of working. Holocracy was introduced by Zappos, like almost like that, right? And they just changed their operating model, just like that. In the same way, Netflix bet the farm on streaming, but also on the subscription model from its standard DVD. Some people are able to make that big leap. If you take a bank, for example, they're never going to change overnight. They're going to make small steps. They're going to just, we'll take one team and we'll do some Scrum. And we'll maybe visualize our workflow. We'll make incremental changes that you barely even notice, right? It's perfectly valid approach, right? It's how the Kanban method works, right? You just start from where you are and incrementally evolve and take the Kaizen approach. But it's about going big bang all in, or about just evolving slowly towards that end state, right? Do you completely cut out all bad fats and all sugar and all processed food from your diet, or do you just focus on, and all alcohol? You just pick one of those things and maybe reduce it slightly more, pick another one, reduce it slightly more. Again, it's easing yourself in versus bang. And that is very much a cultural decision whether to do that. Oh, I've kept you 1 minute over, my apologies. It's 7:30. It's actually 7:31. So the first ING Bank did very well. Yes, it's an interesting approach there. Some of the case studies written about ING. Thank you. I can't not answer this question. Which of the 6 enablers do you find the most challenging, and which one do you look out for first? Yeah, for me, the leadership and management is the most challenging, because unless they want to change, it's like nothing. You can't make them change, right? They have to really want to reinvent the way that they turn up to work every day, right? Bearing in mind that what's got them to this position is the old way of working, and that is particularly big in terms of a challenge. So really, once that happens, the other stuff is fixable. Like the other stuff is just, you've got it. It's not easy, but it's fixable. Right. The first person to answer this question correctly, I will send a signed copy of this. So in 2001, February 2001, the manifesto for Agile software development was written by 17 gentlemen. We were all gentlemen back then. Well, they still are gentlemen, you know what I mean. Now, when that was convened, it was called the Lightweight Frameworks Conference. And one of the things they had to do was decide on a name. What are we going to call this new approach? Is it going to be adaptive? Is it going to be responsive? And somebody suggested the term Agile. First person to tell me who that was. Oh, it's a tough question. First person to tell me who that was will receive a signed copy of this. Who suggested the term Agile at the manifesto? Any ideas, anybody? Didn't say I was going to make it easy. No takers? It was not Martin Fowler. Nice try. It wasn't Ron or Bob. Oh, Peter, I'm going to need a surname. Mike Beadle. Yes, it was Mike Beadle. We lost Mike tragically a couple of years ago now. Really great guy and friend and mentor of mine. Yes, it was his suggestion not to call it the Manifesto for Adaptive or Responsive Software Development, but the Manifesto for Agile Software Development. Peter, ping me your email address and I'll get your details, and I will. It was a sad loss indeed, tragic. Really good guy. But his legacy lives on. Yeah, send me your details and I'll get that book out to you. Folks, my apologies for keeping you a few minutes over. I hope you'll forgive me and come again next month. We have another one next month. It's going to be Natal Dank talking about Agile HR. The people side of things, really going deep into one of those enablers there. And so thank you so much. Please do sign up and turn up for that. She's going to be good fun and talking about the human aspect of agility, which is incredibly important. So that is all from me. I'll let you go and enjoy your evenings, mornings, whatever it is where you are. Thank you so much. And Peter, give me a shout, and everyone else, I will see you next time. Take care, folks. Over and out.